Night story. When I had my second child, I became very ill, so much so that I was never able to breastfeed him. That was painful for me. I lost a lot of weight. Food tasted horrible to me. I didn't even have the strength to walk. Everything I smelled made me want to vomit, even the most delicious thing in the world. My husband and my eldest daughter took care of me. They bathed me, gave me the little food I could eat, kept me clean, and were attentive to anything I needed. Those were 2 tormenting years. I was skin and bones, the skin on my arms hung loose. And every morning, starting at 4 in the morning, I would begin vomiting a thick, white foam in large quantities. It had a fetid smell. I remember the others would cover their mouths when I was in the bathroom vomiting. This made me feel so powerless. My only strength was prayer. Perhaps that's why I didn't let myself die. In that short time, I developed everything. Sugar problems, liver, kidneys, thyroid. Every test was worse news. The treatments would work for a month, and the next I had to find something more expensive. No clinic could figure out what was really wrong with me. My husband, who was doing very well at work back then, paid for every specialist there was. He took me to several cities, and it was always the same. It would work for a month and then I'd relapse. I reached a point where I begged him, with the little strength I had left, feeling almost on the verge of death, to stop spending money on me because this situation was aging him. He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't working well, he had to take care of the children, and he always spent the night awake making sure I was okay. He would often carry me out of the room so I could vomit. It hurt me deeply to see him like that because we had always been a couple with clear goals and were organized. We both worked and had bought our house with great effort. We had good savings, our children lacked nothing, and we were very attentive to each other. The misfortune was my illness, which I never thought was the product of someone's malice. I had a friend my whole life. At the beginning of my marriage, she would come to my house every weekend. We've known each other since we were kids. We studied together. In fact, we grew up in the same neighborhood I left when I started working and managed to get my mom out of there to a better area because it was always a dangerous zone. No potable water, ruined houses, brush, diseases, delinquency. So I always knew that with my studies I would get ahead, and I did it. Also, I was an only child. I lived with my mom and an aunt. Since I was alone, this friend was like a sister to me. That's why in school I always helped her, and when I entered university I tried to help her get in, apply for scholarships and all that, but it never worked out. She ended up getting involved with a guy who treated her very badly and hit her. That's when she suddenly stopped talking to me one day. She disappeared for many years. It was when I was getting married that she showed up at my house out of nowhere to congratulate me. I was happy and invited her to the wedding, and she accompanied us to the church. From there we started seeing each other again. I would tell her about my life, how I was doing, and she seemed happy, but whenever we talked about her, she withheld any details. In fact, she never really explained where she lived. When I got pregnant the first time, she asked me if I would let her be the godmother. I happily agreed, but in the end it never happened. Something always came up when we were going to baptize the girl, so I ended up baptizing her with a sister-in-law. When I got pregnant with the second, she started coming to the house more often. She was the one helping me. In fact, if I asked her, we would spend the afternoon together, have coffee, laugh like 2 good friends enjoying a pure friendship. It was around then that I started feeling sick, and when I gave birth, the doctor told me I had a problem with my circulatory system and that I should avoid breastfeeding the baby for the time being. One random day, I was washing diapers in the patio. The baby was asleep in his crib when suddenly I hear him let out a loud scream as if he had been hit. I run to see what had happened, and I find her, my friend, holding him and comforting him. I was surprised and asked her, "When did you get here?" "I just came in," she said. "What's wrong with the baby?" I asked. "I don't know, I found him crying," was what she said, "but I got him to sleep. I think he needs to be changed." I took the baby from her, quite annoyed because I didn't understand why she had entered the house without warning or asking. Besides, there was something about her that time that made me uncomfortable. I don't know if it was her tone of voice or her gaze, but she seemed like a different person. What I told her was, "Look, I'm feeling really sick. If you want, come another day. I'm not in condition to receive visitors." She let out a laugh without saying anything, almost mockingly, turned around and left. From that day on, she never came back to visit me. And curiously, from that day on, the nausea, headaches, and early morning vomiting also began. I never suspected her, honestly. In fact, I thought the reason she hadn't come back was because of the way I told her to leave. I even felt bad about it, so much so that I thought about giving her a gift. But from that day on, I couldn't focus on anything other than my suffering. One night, I was in a delirium from the recurring fever when I heard a strange sound from the kitchen hallway. My husband always left the door open in case of an emergency. And from where I was, I managed to see someone walking through the living room. I thought it was my daughter, but it looked like a much taller person. I immediately woke my husband, who was more alarmed by the fever I had than by what I was trying to tell him. I remember he ran out, I don't know how, to look for medicine, and I was left with my head suspended on the pillow. At that moment, I see my friend appear in front of the bedroom door, as if she had been hiding in the darkness the whole time. I was paralyzed. I didn't understand why I was seeing her there. A moment later, my husband arrived and I didn't see her anymore. I told him to turn on the light to check that there was someone in the house, and he told me no, that there was no one. Another night passed. I start having contractions to vomit in the early morning. My husband gets up, alarmed, and when he goes to carry me, I see a woman pass in front of the bedroom door wearing a black dress. I didn't say anything because I was so unwell I could barely breathe. My husband took me to the bathroom, and while I'm vomiting, we hear my daughter scream. He runs out to see and finds her crying in a corner of the living room, saying a woman had picked her up from her bed and taken her out of the room. My husband looked at her and said, "You must have gotten up sleepwalking to pee, you were dreaming things, you were scared. Don't worry about anything." But at that point I had my clear suspicions. Even so, no matter how much I tried to explain it to him, he didn't take me seriously. He was only worried that the illness was affecting my mind. And to a certain extent, I started to believe that too, because what explanation could there be for a person entering the house in the middle of the night when everything was locked without anyone else seeing her? It made no sense. They must be my hallucinations. It was in those days that I started praying more frequently, asking God for my health, for my children, and for those things that were tormenting me. And that, in a way, brought me a bit of peace. I was still suffering physically, but at least my mind was calm. I didn't know the worst was just beginning. One afternoon, I was in bed with the baby, cuddling him, and my daughter came into the room with a glass of water and some medicine for me. As she crosses the door and stands in front of the bed, she freezes, standing stiff, looking at me. I ask her what's wrong, but she throws everything on the floor and starts screaming in horror. Anxiously, I asked her with my hoarse, weak voice what was happening. I tried to stand up but couldn't. I told her to come closer so I could hug her, but she was trapped in her desperation. You could see she couldn't breathe well. She screamed and passed her hands over her head until she fainted. As best I could, I got out of bed, dragged myself with a sheet, put it next to her, and lay there until my husband arrived and found us. When the girl woke up, she said she had seen a horrible thing next to me in bed. She said desperately, "It was horrible, Mommy. It had a deformed face, black skin as if it were rotten, and yellow eyes, and it was next to you touching the baby." That's when my husband started to worry. It wasn't just me seeing things recurrently anymore. Besides, around those days, the baby started getting marks on his little belly, like black stretch marks, and no one could tell us what it was, saying it must be a food allergy. There were many times we experienced similar things. The girl being frightened or me seeing a woman walking in front of the bedroom door. Several months after the incident of my daughter fainting, the most horrible event I remember happened. It was early morning, maybe around 2, when in the middle of sleep, a tormenting headache gripped me and pulled me into a nightmare. In it, I saw a woman who looked just like me, naked, carrying my son wrapped in a black cloth. When I got close and uncovered his little face, flies and worms poured out of his mouth. That night, I woke up crying and spiked a fever. My husband hugged me and gave me a kiss on the forehead to calm me down. And out of nowhere at that moment, the baby starts crying, and almost immediately my daughter appears running, saying she had seen a woman in the window of her room. My husband gets up running to see what's happening, and just as he leaves, the baby's crib shakes as if someone had kicked it angrily. There, I start delirating again. I felt like I was leaving, my body turning cold. I think I was actually dying. My daughter squeezed my hand tightly while I saw, in the background on the wall next to the door, a shadow moving from side to side. I felt that evil presence in the room. I don't know at what point I lost my mind and fell deep into a nightmare again. It was too strange, it felt just like sleep paralysis, but I knew it was something more because I could hear my daughter shouting, "Mommy, Mommy," while rubbing my forehead, but at the same time, I heard in my other ear someone with a doll-like voice saying things to me. The girl told me to wake up, that the baby was scared because my body was shaking as if I were having an epileptic seizure, but I couldn't contain my fear. The other voice was still there, repeating over and over these words that I can't erase from my head. It said, "Open my flesh, walk on my blood, give me power, give me power." It repeated this incessantly. I didn't understand why I was hearing these words echoing in my head, but at one moment I could see it clearly. I remember, as a reflection, I closed my eyes and seemed to be in another place, as if my spirit had been suspended from my body. But I wasn't in my room, I was in front of her, the one I called my friend, who was naked, bathing in a black liquid like rotten blood, and repeating those words over and over in front of a kind of altar where there was a photo of me from when I was a child. My expression was to say, "Jehovah Almighty, may this have no effect on me." There, I woke up again, this time for real, in my room next to my children and my husband, who, frantic, told me he had been chasing a snake all over the house, but what he found was a jar of blood under the display case with the girls' things. I explained to him what I had dreamed, or rather the vision I had had, and this is where everything starts to unravel. Almost 3 months later, he comes home all dirty and out of breath, sits on the bed and starts talking to me, telling me he had seen my friend several times because, before I told him I had visions of her, she had approached him asking how I was. At first, he thought it was normal, that it was concern, but later, with the visions, he kept frequenting her to see if he could find out something. He tells me she never let him take her home. They always walked from the company parking lot to a bar 4 blocks away, had 2 beers, and she would leave. On more than one occasion, she made direct advances towards him, even asking him once if he wasn't thinking of starting his life over, that he was too young to be wasting his time with a hopeless person like me. Everything made sense to me. Somehow he says he found out where she lived. He went there, confronted her, and told her everything that was happening. She just laughed at him and told him I was crazy, that it was all a lie. But my husband persisted and persisted until he forced his way into her house, even though 2 neighbors started hitting him, thinking he was an abuser. He went in, checking everything while she screamed vulgarities at him and hit him. He searched all the rooms but didn't see anything. He says that when he was leaving because the police had been called, he saw through a window in the patio that there was a kind of bathroom outside. A small construction with blocks that had candles on top, but also had one of its sides covered with trash bags. That's where he found the thing. All the neighbors saw what was there. A board with strange symbols drawn on it, several small plaster saints, a figure with horns on top of a wooden altar, many black candles, rotten flowers, photos of people, among them a cutout of me as a child in my school uniform. He says one lady recognized several photos of a young man from the neighborhood. They didn't lynch her because the police had already arrived to get my husband out, but the people wanted to set the place on fire. In the end, I never knew what else happened with her. They say it's enough to discover the witch for her to lose her power over you, but it took me years of liberation. Thanks to God and prayer, I was able to recover from that, but I almost lost my life and my family, all because of the malice and envy of another person.